The lake wasn't just water to mate, it was a bloodline, a legacy, the heart of my family's land, and I didn't know it yet. But that quiet summer evening would be the last time it felt like mine. The sun had started its lazy descent over the willow-framed water, turning everything gold. I sat on my grandfather's old bench, the one he carved by hand the year I was born, feeling the grain beneath my fingers like I always did when I needed grounding. My koi swam slow, elegant loops beneath the surface, the ripples fanning outward like soft echoes of every memory I'd ever made there. Some of those koi were older than most marriages in our neighborhood. Their lineage traced directly to the fish my grandfather had imported from Japan, in the 70s bright flashes of orange, white, and gold that carried his care and patience in every scale. The air was thick with the scent of blooming wisteria and late summer grass, and for a brief moment, the only sound I registered was the soft splash of a tail breaking the waterline. That serenity shattered with the first high-pitched laugh from next door. At first, I barely noticed it. Patricia had been planning her engagement party for weeks. Balloons, string lights, caterers unloading expensive trays of canapé, seen it all set up over the past 2 days from the edge of my property. She was the president of our HOA, a position she wielded like royalty, her word law, her smiles sharp as glass. Her fiancé, Derek, a real estate developer with the personality of a corkboard and the charm of a wet sponge, seemed to always hover behind her, quietly nodding, checking his phone, and never quite meeting anyone's gaze. It wasn't until the music swelled and the sounds of clinking champagne flutes mixed with a microphone squeal that I felt something shift, something unnatural, like the storm before a tornado when the birds go quiet. I heard her voice rise over the speakers, rehearsed and smooth, the same one she used during HOA meetings when pretending to care about dog leash violations or paint color disputes. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate our love," she said with syrupy confidence, and I felt an involuntary shiver crawl down my spine. She was always like this, so performative, so curated, always angling for applause, but tonight, something felt different. I rose from the bench, curiosity beating out unease, and drifted toward the fence line where the noise poured out in waves of polite laughter and camera-ready adoration. That's when she said the words that stopped my heart cold. "As you know," she said, "in our beautiful HOA community, we believe in sharing, in caring. We're not just neighbors, we're a family." There were soft claps, a few murmurs of agreement, the kind that come from people who want to be seen agreeing. And in the spirit of that unity, I wanted to give Derek a gift, something truly special, something that represents what this community is all about. There was a pause. I could hear her flipping through papers for dramatic effect. This original HOA layout from 1985 shows what many of you may not realize: we have official community lake access. My stomach dropped. That map. I knew it well. It referenced a small public boat ramp on the far east end of the development, completely detached from my property. But she wasn't talking about that. She was building up to something, and I could feel the dread settle like lead in my chest. She didn't stop. So tonight, in front of all our wonderful friends and neighbors, I am officially gifting this beautiful lake to my future husband. She raised a glass. To Derek, and to the future Derek's lake. Cheers erupted. Glasses clinked. My ears rang. I could hardly hear the waves of praise, applause, and phone flashes over the pounding in my chest. I stood frozen, halfway between fury and disbelief, watching my Lakemy family's lake be handed over like a party favor, as if the years of care, the ownership, the bloodline embedded in that shoreline meant nothing. And what terrified me more than the lie itself was how perfectly, deliberately she had orchestrated this moment, how she'd constructed a performance so convincing that it could become reality unless I acted fast. I didn't wait. I pushed through her side gate, holding my grandfather's deed folder like a weapon of truth. The crowd parted slowly, eyes wide with confusion and curiosity. Patricia's expression didn't falter her, lips curled into a polite smile that barely veiled her glee. I stopped a few feet from her podium, heart racing, jaw tight, and said as evenly as I could manage, "That lake is on my private property. You don't own it, and you have no right to gift what isn't yours." The party went silent, the music dimmed, and suddenly it felt like everyone was waiting for a punchline. She turned to face me fully, microphone still in hand. "Oh, Marcus," she said sweetly, I think you're mistaken. That lake is a community asset. As HOA president, I have every right to allocate community resources in ways that benefit us all. I raised the deed, my hand trembling, the official county seal embossed in gold at the top. This legal document says otherwise. My grandfather purchased that land in 1972. It's private. Always has been. Derek shuffled beside her, looking down at his phone again, visibly uncomfortable. Patricia's expression hardened just enough for me to notice. "Security," she called sharply, not even looking my way. "We have a guest who's had a little too much to drink. Please escort him out." Two large men emerged from the crowd, wearing black polos and earpieces. Before I could say another word, they grabbed me by the arms, ignoring the deed still in my grip, and began dragging me toward the gate. "You can't do this," I said loudly, resisting just enough to slow them down. "She's lying. That lake is mine. She knows it. Ask any, my family's owned it for 50 years. Patricia raised her mic again. "I'm so sorry, everyone. Some people just can't handle seeing others happy." Laughter returned. The music swelled again. I stumbled on a hose as I was shoved through the gate, hitting the grass hard. The folder with the deed slipped from my hand and opened on impact, pages fluttering like wounded wings. Someone gasped. Someone else snapped a photo. I saw flashes again, felt grass stains soak into my pants. "He's attacking us," Patricia shouted from behind me. "Call the police." I was speechless, stunned, lying on my own land while strangers cheered a theft in real time, celebrating a gift she had no right to give. And in that moment, lying there in the dark, with the music pulsing behind me and fury building inside, I knew one thing with absolute clarity: Patricia wasn't just trying to steal my lake. She was trying to erase my entire legacy. But she had made a mistake. She'd done it in public. She'd done it on record. And that meant I had a chance to fight back, no matter how big of a lie she told. At 6:00 a.m., sharp, knocking, I was pulled from sleep with a start. There's a sound that settles into your bones before your brain even registers it, the kind that only means one thing: trouble. I threw on a robe, half stumbling through the living room, and opened the door to find two uniformed officers on my porch. And standing just behind them, like a hawk surveying a field mouse, was Patricia, fully dressed, not a hair out of place, and holding a tissue in one hand, like she was already halfway into a soap opera monologue. The older officer glanced down at his clipboard before lifting his eyes to mine. "Mr. Marcus Thompson?" I nodded. "We received a report of threats made at a private event last night. Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Before I could answer, Patricia stepped forward, pressing her hand to her chest as if the act of breathing had suddenly become too dramatic to bear. "Officers, I'm terrified." He barged into my engagement party, screamed at me in front of 50 guests, and threatened to destroy everything Derek and I have built. I didn't feel safe in my own neighborhood. Her voice trembled with perfectly timed fragility. I took a breath, swallowing down the immediate heat rising in my throat. That is absolutely not what happened. Patricia announced she was gifting my private lake to her fiancé. I came over with the property deed to correct the lie. That's all. The younger officer, who looked barely out of academy training, blinked at her, then at me. "Do you have the deed?" I disappeared inside for a moment and returned with the folder that had become my lifeline. "Right here. 3 generations of ownership. My grandfather built that lake with his bare hands." Patricia, still clinging to her performance, pulled out a folder of her own like she had rehearsed this very exchange. "OA bylaws clearly state that community waterfront areas are under our jurisdiction. Section 47B outlines community lake access." She handed it to the older officer with a smug smile. He scanned it slowly, then looked up, brow creased. "Ma'am, this section refers to the public boat ramp over on Elm Street, not Mr. Thompson's property. Do you have any documentation showing you own the lake in question?" That pause, those few seconds of silence, felt more satisfying than any argument I could have made. Patricia's face twitched, just slightly. "That's outdated paperwork. The spirit of the law indicates shared resources." The younger officer glanced at the deed again. "This isn't a criminal matter, it's a civil dispute. But if you're making false claims to law enforcement, that is a serious issue." She bristled, shifting tactics. "He threatened me. You saw the video." The older cop tilted his head. "Ma'am, claiming a property that's not yours. And then calling the cops when someone corrects you, that's not a threat. That's a dispute. And it's better settled in court than on someone's lawn. Patricia's carefully crafted mask began to crack around the edges. Her eyes flashed. You haven't heard the last of this. She spat at me as the officers turned to leave. I've been president of this HOA for 3 years. I know every loophole. That lake will be Derek's wedding gift, whether you like it or not. And just like that, she stalked off, leaving behind the distinct smell of entitlement and desperation. But I didn't have long to breathe. By 2:00 p.m., the sounds of heavy machinery echoed up the hill. I stepped onto my porch and stared in disbelief as a flatbed truck rolled up along the property line. Workers began unloading metal posts, rolls of vinyl banner, and what looked suspiciously like the structural framework for a billboard. And there she was again, Patricia dressed in her signature color-coordinated blazer, barking directions at the crew while waving her phone like a general rallying troops. No, angle it more left. That way the text points directly toward the water. Yes, perfect. Then, standing in front of it all like she was unveiling a masterpiece, she smiled wide and declared, "Welcome to Derek's Lake Resort Spa." My jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd crack a molar. The billboard was massive, bold red and gold text across a painted rendering of my lake, except in this fantasy. It had been paved, docked, commercialized. A marina floated in the center. A resort spa hugged the shoreline, and a couple stood at the end of a white pier, kissing under a floral archway, precisely where my grandfather used to sit and watch the sunset with my grandmother. The sign stood technically on her property, yes, but the arrow, the entire image, the implication, it all pointed directly at what was mine. I looked closer and saw Derek off to the side, sweat beading on his forehead despite the mild weather. His shoulders were tight. His phone was in his hand again. He kept glancing toward Patricia and then back to the ground, shifting nervously. Something was clearly weighing on him. But Patricia? She was thriving. She turned to the camera and chirped, "Progress always faces resistance, but love conquers all." I didn't wait another minute. I fired off a message to Gerald. "Need to meet ASAP. She's escalating. Cops, now billboard. Full commercial fantasy on my lake." His reply was immediate. "Come to my office in 1 hour. Bring everything. And Marcus start documenting everything she says, does, and claims. All of it." While gathering paperwork, I noticed something odd. Patricia's HOA election record from 3 years ago, the one that made her president, was unusually neat. Too neat. Dozens of addresses had cast votes. But I remembered clearly that many of those properties were vacant back then, foreclosures, probate homes, one lot that hadn't even been built yet. I texted Gerald again. "We need to look deeper. Something's off with the election itself." His answer came fast and sharp. "Already digging. You're not going to believe what I found." By the time I arrived at Gerald's office, the leather chairs and smell of old tobacco brought back memories of my grandfather's first land dispute decades ago. But what Gerald laid out on the table wasn't nostalgia, it was a bombshell. "Marcus," he said, "you were absolutely right. We pulled the original voter rolls from the HOA election. Look at this, page after page." He showed me signature after signature that had been faked. Vacant homes, inactive addresses, even names that didn't exist. She forged an entire election to secure her presidency. This isn't just property theft. This is systemic fraud, and it's about to come crashing down. He handed me 3 documents. An emergency restraining order to keep Patricia and Derek 500 feet from my land, a cease and desist targeting the billboard and all false advertising, and a formal complaint demanding the HOA board investigate election fraud immediately. "When do we serve her?" I asked, already halfway through signing. Gerald's eyes gleamed with that calculated satisfaction only a veteran lawyer can wear. "Funny you ask. She's hosting a live-stream investor call this afternoon. Public service of legal documents is legal and poetic." Back home, I watched the chaos unfold. Patricia sat in a glossy home office with a faux marble backdrop, detailing her vision for Derek's Lake Resort and Spa. She clicked through slides, showing artist renderings of my property, mutilated into a wedding venue, a commercial marina, a floating restaurant. Her voice practically trembled with joy as she described it as a pristine location maintained lovingly for generations. The irony could have drowned a man. "Derek, seated beside her, kept glancing off camera, dabbing his forehead, swallowing hard. Then came the knock. She paused, clearly annoyed. "One moment, everyone," she said, beckoning Derek to answer. He didn't move. The knocking came again, more assertive. She sighed and walked off screen, forgetting to mute the call. Every investor, every viewer, me included, watched as Sheriff Davidson appeared in the frame holding a thick stack of papers. "Patricia Morrison," he said, "you are hereby served." Her face drained of color. "This is highly inappropriate," she muttered. "I'm conducting business. You're being served an emergency restraining order, a cease and desist regarding your billboard, and a formal complaint filed with the HOA board." The chat exploded. Comments flew like bullets. "What's happening? Is this legit? I'm pulling my investment." When she returned on screen, she tried to smile. "A minor misunderstanding, a legal team will sort it out." But it was too late. The investors were gone. The fantasy shattered. Derek began gathering papers silently, his hands trembling. When Patricia reached to grab them back, he yanked them away. "I need to speak to my own lawyer," he said. "This is getting out of hand." That night, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. But even as the silence returned to my lake, a storm was still brewing. The damage Patricia had done wasn't just legal or emotional, it was ecological. I woke at sunrise the next morning to find the lake's waterline had dropped nearly 60%. My koithos, living, breathing legacies, struggled in the shallows. Lotus flowers were exposed and wilting. Mud stretched where water should have been. My stomach turned as I realized this wasn't naturite, was sabotage. I ran toward the bank and saw the source. Sandbags, planks, makeshift dams had been constructed upstream right where the creek fed into the lake. My security footage would later confirm it. Derek, alone in the dead of night, following Patricia's whispered orders, had blocked the water flow. Every second of it was calculated. And the consequences were devastating. My family's koisum worth thousands, all priceless in memory floated gasping. Sunshine, the oldest and most beautiful, lay still in the mud. The entire ecosystem was collapsing. Beavers were gone. Herons circled with confusion. Frogs and turtles thrashed helplessly. I worked for hours, cradling fish, carrying them to deeper water, hands coated in mud and grief. Then I began documenting, not just for court for justice, because this wasn't a property dispute anymore. This was vandalism, desecration, a crime not just against me, but against generations of careful stewardship. Gerald filed the $3 million lawsuit that afternoon, and that was just the beginning. The EPA stepped in. Wildlife officials issued preliminary damage reports. Federal crimes were on the table now. And as the legal gears started turning, one truth became clearer than ever. Patricia thought she was playing chess, but she hadn't realized she'd just made a move that brought the entire board crashing down. For 48 hours, Patricia went silent. No posts, no statements, no passive-aggressive yard signs or HOA bulletins slipped into mailboxes. Nothing. But if there's one thing I'd learned after years of dealing with Herets, that Patricia was never quiet unless she was planning something. And whatever she was cooking up next, it wasn't going to be subtle. The first sign came just before dusk on a Thursday. I happened to be reviewing restoration quotes at my desk when I noticed something strange through the living room window. Patricia stood in her upstairs window with a pair of binoculars, slowly scanning my property like a hawk sizing up its prey. She had a yellow legal pad in one hand and appeared to be scribbling notes. But she wasn't looking at the damaged lake anymore. She was studying my fence line, checking the angles of my house, eyeing the corners where I'd recently installed new motion lights. She wasn't inspecting what she'd already destroyed. She was looking for blind spots. I mentioned it to Gerald that evening, and his advice was calm and measured. She's not finished. But whatever she tries next, do not engage directly. She's trying to provoke you. Do not give her an inch. I agreed in theory, but then came the sound, a sharp crack of wood echoing across the yard like a gunshot. I rushed to the window and froze. Derek stood outside on the narrow public easement strip between my land and the lake, path holding a sledgehammer. He wasn't just standing there. He was swinging, and with every blow, a piece of my family's history splintered and fell. The bench, my grandfather's bench, the one he had built for my grandmother, the one they sat on every Sunday to watch the sun dip below the water, the one I had sat on for every major moment of my life. Derek was destroying it piece by piece. Logic tried to rise up in my mind, tried to warn me to wait, to call someone, to let the footage speak for itself. But rage and grief are louder than reason. I threw open the door and sprinted toward the path, heart pounding like a war drum. "Get away from there!" I shouted, barely able to breathe. "That bench is sacred. My grandfather built that with his own hands." Derek looked up, eyes wide with mock panic, and stumbled back. "Help! He's attacking me!" he cried, dropping the sledgehammer in theatrical horror. "Patricia, call 911. And from behind a shrub stepped Patricia, phone already held high, capturing only what she wanted people to see, running full speed toward her frightened fiancé. I stopped just short of Derek, but I was trembling, the sight of my bench in pieces breaking something deep inside. I pushed him back, not hard, just enough to keep him from swinging again. He fell backward like a marionette whose strings had been cut, clutching his arm with a wail. "My arm! He broke my arm!" Patricia screamed, her voice rising into hysteria. "Oh my God, he's gone mad! Someone call the police!" Neighbors began pouring out of their houses. All they saw was Derek on the ground. Patricia weeping, me standing over them, fists clenched, chest heaving, face twisted in disbelief and fury. "He destroyed my bench," I said, my voice cracking. That's all I had left of my grandparents. Patricia spun her narrative like a spider wrapping a fly. "He's been harassing us, ever since we announced the lake resort," she sobbed. "This is the second time he's tried to assault Derek. We're not safe here." And this time, she didn't wait to spin the story afterward, she streamed it live. Thousands were already watching within minutes, most of them seeing only her version of reality. A man overcome with jealousy, a neighbor unwilling to let go. I stood in the wreckage, staring at the carved nameplate my grandfather had inscribed, "For my beloved Rose." It was split clean in two. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Gerald. His voice was low, grave. "Please tell me you didn't touch him." I closed my eyes. "He was destroying my grandfather's bench, Gerald." A sigh dragged across the line like wind through a canyon. "I understand, but Patricia's filed for an emergency restraining order. She submitted video evidence. She'll claim you're unstable, violent. This could undermine everything." And in that moment, I realized the trap I had walked into wide, eyed heart first. She'd planned it perfectly, and now, the question wasn't just whether I could prove she lied. It was whether I could undo the damage caused by 30 seconds of justified rage. 3 days passed. Then, just after 2:00 a.m., my phone lit up with a call from a blocked number. I almost ignored it. Reporters had been calling non-stop since the incident. But something made me swipe. It didn't connect. Instead, I saw a voicemail icon. I played it back. The voice on the recording was slurred, thick with alcohol and panic. "Mr. Yarrow, is this the lawyer? I need help. I can't do this anymore." It was Derek. My number must have been next to his attorney's. And what followed was a confession so complete, so damning, it took my breath away. "The FBI called about Dubai. They know about the money. I can't go to prison for Patricia's crap. She made me block the lake. She made me destroy that bench. She drew diagrams, man. She planned everything. She forged the HOA election. Half the names don't exist. She needed the lake to cover up the missing HOA funds. She stole like hundreds of thousands. I have the spreadsheets. I have everything. But I need immunity." I sat in my dark living room, staring at the wall, heart racing. Then I forwarded the recording to Gerald. His response came instantly. "Do not delete that. Bring it to court." Tomorrow, and when we walked into the emergency hearing the next morning, I didn't feel like I was on trial. I felt like I was walking into the final act of a very long, very calculated takedown. Patricia walked in wearing power red, holding a folder thick with evidence. She didn't even glance at Derek, who followed behind her like a man marching toward his own hanging. Her lawyer began with practiced poise, playing the edited video of me confronting Derek. They leaned heavily on words like unhinged, aggressive, volatile. The judge looked grim. My heart sank. Then Gerald stood. "Your Honor," he said, "we have new evidence that recontextualizes everything." Objections flew. The judge overruled. "I'll hear it." The courtroom fell silent as Derek's drunken confession played aloud. as he described how Patricia orchestrated everything from the bench destruction to the lake sabotage to the fake HOA election. Gasps erupted when he mentioned the money laundering and missing funds. Patricia's face drained to pale ash. And when Derek's voice, on tape, said the words, "She said it was unfinished. Family businessher X's dad tried to buy that lake years ago. She's obsessed." Patricia lost it. She leapt to her feet, screaming at Derek, calling him a coward, a traitor. The judge pounded the gavel. "Ms. Morrison, sit down or be held in contempt." But she was past control. "You think this changes anything? That lake belongs to my legacy. He stole it first." Derek stood slowly. "I want a separate attorney," he said. "I'll testify. I have the documents. She forged everything." The courtroom shook with the weight of truth. The judge denied her motion to dismiss my lawsuit, denied the restraining order, and then, calmly, said, "Based on this testimony and evidence, I am referring this case for criminal investigation." At that exact moment, 2 federal agents stepped forward. "Patricia Morrison," one said, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, environmental crimes, and election tampering." Handcuffs clicked. And Patricia, once the queen of the HOA, the self-declared guardian of the lake, was led away in stunned silence. The days that followed moved in a whirlwind. The lawsuit was approved. $3 million in damages. The HOA board voted unanimously to remove her. A forensic audit revealed over $500,000 missing money she'd siphoned into fake contracts and shell companies. Derek, now cooperating, avoided the worst charges, turning over every document, every email, every voice memo. The EPA declared the lake restoration a federal matter. The City Council passed new ordinances protecting legacy-owned properties from HOA overreach. And a month later, I sat at the edge of the water. A local woodworker, moved by the story, had built me a new bench, a near exact replica of the one my grandfather made. I ran my hand along the grain, felt the strength in its design. The koi had begun to return, thanks to volunteers and donated stock from breeders around the country. The lake breathed again. Gerald sat beside me as the sun set, the sky ablaze with amber and gold. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said quietly. "You fought the right way, even when they didn't." I nodded, eyes fixed on the ripples. The war was over, the legacy protected, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the water was still. Peaceful. Mine.